Where are we, dude?
It appears we have found ourselves in Area 62.
Area 62? What's that?
Mostly a state of mind and being emanating from somewhere within the Mojave Desert, but also a podcast sharing the culture of the high desert, beaming from Copper Mountain College in Joshua Tree. My protocols require me to state that the views you find expressed inside of Area 62 are the personal views of those participating in the podcast, not the official policies or positions of Copper Mountain College or the Copper Mountain Community College District.
Out in Mojave, under desert skies, lights are dancing where the secrets lie. Yucca Man's creeping, don't you blink an eye. Tourists gone missing, and we don't know why. UFOs zooming, zipping to and fro. Aliens out here, putting on a show. Shallow graves hidden under desert glow. Magic and mystery, only locals know. Oh, Area 62, what you got for me? What you got? Signs in the sky and a mystery. LA tourists lost without a clue. Where'd they go? Something strange down in Area 62.
Area 62 is sponsored by the Museum of History in Granite in Felicity, California, where history meets art and remembrance. The mission of the Museum of History in Granite is to engrave in granite highlights of the history of humanity. Remember, the purest form of education may be a self-directed search for knowledge. These summaries of vast subjects promote and encourage such efforts. The Museum of History in Granite welcomes you to visit and explore over 700 granite panels of history on 18 monuments. The museum's 1,100 etchings make it also a fascinating outdoor art museum. Learn more about the Museum of History in Granite and Felicity, California at www.museumforever.org. Your business or organization can become a sponsor of Area 62, and you can support the Mojave's Cultural Podcast for as little as $3 per month at patreon.com/Area 62. Area 62, beaming to you from Joshua Tree in the Mojave Desert.
See the lights align. Magic's in the air, making us rewind. Desert secrets, far as we can find. Ooh, yeah. Come and get lost, leave it all behind. Oh, Area 62, what you got for me? What you got for me? What you got? Signs in the sky and a mystery. Yeah.
Welcome to the Area 62 podcast. This is Nayeli and today we'll be joined once again by special guest Michael DiGregorio and my co-host JRod. We're picking up off the last episode with Michael, a desert journalist with a rich background, former editor of Hustler magazine, Canada's Northern Lights Journalism Award recipient, 11-time award winner for his 2 documentary feature films, Scrapper and Of Bombs and Men. Today, Michael shares more of his fascinating stories through the lens of the desert.
Look to the stars, see the lights align. Woo! Magic's in the air, making us rewind.
So, who are the outlaw survivalists who appear in Bombs and Men?
There are approximately 5, maybe 6, and I would say only 2 of them are really hardcore. Snake Man begins the film, who's just a fascinating character. On camera, he admits to doing it all, that he had run illegal aliens, acted as a guide for the smuggling familias, had scrapped, and also, as we began to get more comfortable, he showed me all the ordnance that he had cached, taken in from other trespassers, other people that were just kind of, half-assed ordnance retrievers. And he would take it in and he would actually turn it to Fire Chief Mike Alexic. So he was acting as this wonderful kind of
Liaison?
Yeah, liaise between, the outlaw and the official. And the layers to Snake Man were just fascinating. As I got to know him, he had a pretty massive head injury as a chef in Durango, Colorado, and was prone to schizophrenic seizures, was a 5150, and that's how he kind of tumbled out to Niland. And he was also something of a trailer park poet. He had just amazing observations. You'd have to wait him out. And then, oh, God, that's a beauty. One of the first magazine assignments that I had was LA Times Sunday Magazine, and Professor Kim Stringfellow was the photographer that I partnered up with. And we visited Snake Man at his trailer, and it was incredibly claustrophobic. And he had a young speckled rattlesnake, probably 12, maybe 14 inches long, so it was immature. And he called it Beastie Boy. And Kim and I had just entered Snake Man's tumble down trailer, and Gary, his real name is Gary presents this snake, and we were so close to Beastie Boy that he ejaculated on Professor Kim and myself. That was one of the best anecdotes that I have about Gary. But he was a fascinating character and introduced us to numerous people, some of the really hard characters in that outlaw cosmos, and some of the people that were just completely overmatched, like Randy and Ron, who also occupy some of the early vignettes, the two brothers. At every instance with the two of them, everything was framed by desperation. These fellas they couldn't get it together. From the rig to the actual act of retrieving, they just couldn't get it done. And then you juxtapose that with JR, who kind of dominates the second half of the film. A mud marine, served multiple tours in our Southeast Asian wars, and then became something of an assassin. He worked for the American Diplomatic Corps in Mexico, and he was sent into Colombia and then returned to the U.S. and met a woman, Lori, and lo and behold, they end up on the other side of the training range where his life as a Marine began as a 17-year-old. And he was the antithesis of Ron and Randy in that he treated it like a job. He went to work. He raped for sundown, and he had 2 or 3 chopped VWs. He'd take the windshield off so that it wouldn't throw off the reflection glare. He'd take the doors off so it was easy just to grab ordnance as he went. And he was just, what was staggering was the fact that he was nearly blind in one eye. And there was numerous times where he'd take me out middle of the night, and he knew his way in, he knew his way out. There was a helicopter gunship coming after us, and I couldn't believe just how nimble he was probably in his 70s when I had these interactions. He knew exactly how to get in, get out, get in, get out. And you both know the desert has no defining characteristics when it's dark. And he knew exactly how to get in and get out of that target. And there's a helicopter gunship right on top of us. He knew his noise discipline as well. Don't go too far from the Jeep. He knew even footfalls, very careful about everything. So he was a consummate pro. And he disclosed to me that his best year scrapping, $70,000 cash. And this is 1990s, early 2000s, just as we begun the Iraq War and the War on Terror.
But why would somebody with all of that rich background, he was a Marine, what was it, diplomatic?
Yeah, he worked for the American Embassy. It was basically quote-unquote wet work.
Why would somebody with all of that want to go into something like scrapping? It just seems so not worth it for somebody from my perspective, but for his.
I totally get that. Now you have to take his life experience into consideration, and the fact that he's traumatized, that he's become something of a misanthrope, and he just does not want interactions with anybody. So he and Lori find a little place on the Blue Mountain side of the Chocolate Mountains, which is the far southeast going towards the Arizona side, going towards Yuma. Extremely remote. And they basically created a compound, a place where nobody was going to find them unless they had a reason to, either Border Patrol, Marines, Naval, Criminal Investigative Service. Very few people knew where he lived, and he wanted it that way. And so he carved out a niche for himself. He knew how to take the ordnance apart, and he was very, very tight with Mel Holcomb, who ran the salvage yard in Niland.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. He definitely niched out something special for himself. But do you think any of that has to reflect how hard it is to socialize back into civilian society?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Absolutely. He was burned out. And I have to tell you, in dropping into the film once again, I realized that he gave me a lot of time. He was very, very good to me. He didn't want anything to do with my two videographer partners. The German he nicknamed Oscar, the Frenchman he nicknamed Pierre, and he was kind of annoyed with them most of the time. But JR would say, let's go. We're going to go. And there was a couple of vignettes that I actually shot. This is a little mini DV. So it's just a camera about this big. And one particular night that he took me into a range where they only drop white phosphorus, which is the new napalm. And it was probably one of the most darkly impactful moments I've had in my life. Everything was just absolutely deathly. The ground itself was ashen. Nothing grew. Yeah.
When you said trauma, do you refer to something more like PTSD, or is it something more childhood-rooted trauma, or everything?
JR had been arrested as a 17-year-old, and I believe he grew up in Arkansas. And the judge basically put it to him, you can either go to the Marine Corps or you can go to prison. So he went to the Marine Corps. And we have a quote in the movie where he learned how to kill before he learned how to live.
Did you get to closely know everyone that way, or?
I would say the majority of the individuals that are portrayed in the first bombing range film, which was called Scrapper, and the second film, which is called The Bombs and Men, I would say I got to real solid ground with nearly all of them, to be honest with you, because I was the first person that cared about them.
Yeah, that's true. When it comes to the characters, which one like uniquely sets themselves apart?
JR in this very kind of the deepest kind of read of this outlaw subculture had his foot in. He may have still been doing wet work because he had claimed to have killed, I think he told me 6 or 7 people on the bombing range. And there was 2 instances where you wanted, as a journalist, you want to confirm somebody's making this contention. You know, I took these people out, and this is the kind of rig that they were driving. When you know, Fire Chief Mike took me up into a wash, and there was the truck that JR had the violent interaction with. And there was a second Chevy Suburban again, and JR went home with that Chevy Suburban. And literally, the gun, the holes that he shot them with AK-47. And both of these vehicles were absolutely riddled with bullets. So I can't tell you that JR had the green light, if you will, from, say, Department of Homeland Security, from maybe a wink and a nod from Indio or El Centro Border Patrol, but he took out people that they were transgressive types. They were either traffickers, they were, yeah.
So tell us more about the story. From what I'm getting at, you said you were in a truck, and then they're diverging between bullets and guns. How would you define it? Was it thrilling? up as you're driving in the middle of the night and you're picking up scrap that has not exploded yet. So you had to trust them very well. What'd you say?
Oh, yeah, you nailed it. Trust was a big factor. Again, in terms of, to return to your question, this is where the pros really rose versus the Boyrams who were overmatched. JR knew exactly how to disassemble a bomb. He knew exactly how to take apart a bomb fin kit, which is where all the money is. $60 to $75, and this is 20 years ago, in just the bomb fins. And you actually have to do some work to take them apart, and then you have 20, 30, 40 of those. With regards to that, the notion of trust, there were 2 or 3 times that I thought, I'm going to die because I'm with guys that they just can't get it done. They were in an underpowered vehicle. They were in a 2-wheel drive pickup where they should have been in a 4-wheel drive pickup. We went out at the wrong time of day. We're in the middle of the target. They're telling me, when the jets come and you see the F-18 wings flex like this, run towards them. Oh, okay, that's scrapper logic. It sounds ridiculous, but it actually makes sense because you're going to run beneath whatever ordnance is coming at you.
Yeah.
In theory.
That's one time too many for me. Did you ever feel like throughout any of those times, this is it, I'm quitting, I'm going home, I can't do this?
Never quit.
What kept you?
Because the story kept building and getting larger and more expansive, and I began to learn about set-up murders. You also have to understand that this is the beginning of the War on Terror. So because we're at a time of war, all the precious metals begin to spike. The metal markets go nuts. So where you were getting 50 cents a pound for brass, you're now getting $1. So war just absolutely juiced that underground economy.
Can you describe to anybody who doesn't know what wet work means? That seems like, well, I'll admit, I don't know what wet work is.
Oh, wet work is you take people out. You kill them.
And the way that you got to know JR's backstory intimately, and you're talking about, how he ended up there, and you're talking about how Snake Man ended up there in Niland. Do you think that most of the scrappers, or do you know that most of the scrappers are native to that area, or?
I would say that nearly of the 6, 8, 9 that I had relations with, maybe 1 was a locally raised, maybe 2. The majority of them had significant difficulties in life that pushed them into the low desert, that pushed them into Niland, that pushed them into Slab City. These were nowhere men in a no man's land. They were out of devices and ways to get over from one day to the next. There's one particular young man from Bakersfield who's, I didn't learn of him while we were filming, and he had worked in the oil fields in Bakersfield, and this was one of the scrappers that I learned had been murdered. There was turf wars because there was so much money for a ne'er-do-well, for somebody that doesn't have an education. Go out and make $1,000 a day. You may lose an arm or a leg, but that's good money down there.
We know where JR, how we got there, and Snake Man how we got there. How'd you get there? Like, where'd you catch wind of the story?
I worked for Larry Flynt and Althea Flynt in Los Angeles from 1983 until 1992. Towards the end of my time with the Flynts, Larry bought a number of non-pornographic magazines. And I was a managing editor at that point, and he bought a law enforcement magazine called SWAT. And I began to pursue a series that was exclusive to crime on public lands in Nevada, Arizona, and California. So I spent a great deal of time with Forest Service, Park Service, BLM rangers talking about what was unique at that time in terms of criminal activity. And it was, methamphetamine was just beginning to explode. The BLM ranger here in the low desert mentioned that, these outlaw survivalists are carving up the Chocolate Mountains. And I thought, wow, that's fascinating. So before I began to pitch this story, I took a reconnoiter, if you will, with the photographer that I was working with pretty regularly. His name Dirty Bob. And Dirty Bob and I pulled up on the north end of the Chocolate Mountains on what was called the Scrapper Knoll, which was basically a boulder stack. It's probably 200-300 foot. And it afforded this fantastic view from the north end into at least two of the targets you could glimpse. And Bob said to me, dude, do you see that van coming at us? And I was just astounded. It looked like the Scooby-Doo van. And it was beneath two F-18s that are just obliterating this target. We're watching this van just coming right at us. And slowly, as he climbed Scrapper Knoll, coming towards us, and Dirty Bob had a green pickup truck. So maybe they thought that we were La Migra, Border Patrol, or who knows. But that door opened like this, and I see this gacked up, skinny kid with a MAC-10 pointing at us, and I'm like, holy fuck, it's on, man. So that was basically how we got introduced to the phenomenon that the bombing range didn't only harbor the ordnance scrappers, but a whole different breed called range runners, which were people that used the range as a point of access to run either methamphetamine, marijuana, illegal immigrants, and then fentanyl.
That's a lot of stuff going through there. And it sounds like these guys are really protective of what they got going on there. The fact that you're getting aimed at with a scary weapon, I'd be out of there. But you had the guts to return. That's impressive.
Would you say this was your toughest assignment or scariest?
Because I continue to go back, I spent probably almost 8 years in illegal trespasses. I was in that war zone a lot. I'll share an example with you. So Vice reached out to me, and they wanted to do a feature on the chocolates and on the Scrapper Range Runner phenomenon. And so we met in Niland, and there was 3, maybe 4, a camera person, the Vice presenter, a segment producer, and myself. And I pointed, we were going to go over here. And the producer called their legal people in New York and said, he's telling us to go in across the border into the military zone. And they said no. So they didn't want to push it. That's what you got to do. That's what you got to do. If you're gonna gain the trust of the scrappers, the range runners, the outlaw survivalists, you got to go, man. You got to feel it. You got to see it. Every time I left, I would go to the ski inn in Bombay Beach and just kind of, wow. It reminded me a lot of, I don't know if either of you seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, but in the closing scene of Keir Dullea is he's found that portal and he's going into all different realms, and that's what it felt like. It was hyper real. It was just holy smoke,
Adrenalizing.
Well, it was adrenaline, but it was also, you had the welfare state, some of the poorest people in the United States colliding with the warfare state. It was just so bizarre to think that these people are basically getting by on just the afterbirth of American empire. They're pulling 2,000-pound bombs. The image that the Los Angeles Times chose, that Professor Kim shot, which is just this great image, 2,000-pound bomb kind of at an angle, and the parachute is blowing in the wind. It's an amazing image. I looked at the tail fin, and it was 1971. We're still using weapons that were manufactured for the Southeast Asian wars. We're still going through those inventories. Think about that.
Why does this film matter so much, not only to you, not only to the people of Niland, not only to these scrappers, but why does it matter on not only a local scale, but on a global scale? What does it mean for us to watch it?
It's something of a cultural artifact, and I'm still immensely proud of it. Irregardless of the fact that, it's shot on mini DV and It looks really, really rough. I love that. I love the fact that it's honest, that it's gritty. It reflects the characters that we ran with. It speaks to a particularly unique moment in the history of the American West, and the fact that we had just declared war on terror, and the irony that this underground economy exploded. As I was getting to know the scrappers, as I was going deeper and learning about these intrigues and setups and so on and so forth, and the money's getting bigger and bigger. The smuggling familias in Brawley and El Centro were also really hip to the fact that these white boys out there were crazy. They were just pushing it. So what did they do? They tapped that outlaw genius and said, you know what? You run illegal aliens rather than pulling off 2,000-pound bombs and cluster munitions. We'll give you $300 for every illegal alien you get through the bombing range. So again, as I'm getting more comfortable with these various personalities, one was basically the kind of middleman between Landy, Ronnie, Downey Holcomb, and the smuggling cartels. So he would just get vehicles for these guys when they didn't have vehicles. He'd tell them, hey, there's a Chevy Suburban and it's parked on 8th Street in El Centro. The keys are on the left rear tire. And the guys would go and they'd have a rig and they'd know where to pick up the load. And the load could be 3, the load could be 8, the load could be 16. They're flat on the floor of the car. They're tight. Yeah, there was one particular, it was crazy, where 2 loads come up on us and we're thinking, oh man, is he armed? We're not. And he just kind of smiled. The gentleman who was in the lead vehicle, and he had a mouth like a gypsy ruin. It was all gold and silver. and Roddy and Randy just kind of, welcome to America.
Beautiful greeting.
Yeah. And they had literally just gone through a war zone. So imagine you've come from Honduras, you've come from El Sal, you've come from Guatemala, and your first exposure to the United States is a war zone that's hot. Because we had twin wars, because we were engaged in Iraq, and because we were also engaged in Afghanistan, the chocolates were absolutely on fire. 24/7, 365. It never stopped. So the ordnance was just piling up.
Yeah, that takes a lot of grit. So let's go back to that 2-wheel drive truck that got stuck in the middle of the daytime. Tell me about, like, what were you thinking there? Like, were you like, man, do I have enough water to last me?
To be honest with you, the water was the least of my worries. It was insanely hot that day. I want to say it was probably 115, 117 degrees, and we're in a white Ford 2-wheel drive pickup, and it was overheating. And again, the 2 fellows that I was with were desperate. They had nothing. They had nothing to eat. This is kind of a tragic footnote. When I met Ron and Randy and Downey, they literally had no money to eat with, and they had all these dogs. So I'd usually stop in Banning or Beaumont. I lived in Hollywood back then, and I'd pick up like a 60-pound bag of dog food. So I love dogs. I love dogs more than people. I want to say about 6 months in, looking around, where are the dogs? The guys had eaten the dog food. All the dogs starved.
Wow.
So that's kind of the setup for the day. That was one of the first days that I thought I was going to die. I was with Downey Holcomb and Randy Borum, underpowered 2-wheel drive pickup, overheating, stuck in the sand, and I'm watching the warplanes, and basically they'll either roar right over the top of you, or they'll do like a pass. If they do see you, they may report back to you and say, there's trespassers on the target, and they may abort the mission. That's big money, because these planes are burning through $2,500 to $3,500 an hour. One plane, gas, one plane. So they get really angry when they have to abort those missions. So that was the first instance. And somehow one of the guys got a bar, and the Godfather scrappers came out and pulled us out of there. And it was just, oh my God, it was the Hail Mary, the ultimate Hail Mary.
Really quickly, I feel like we just kind of skimmed over the fact that you just mentioned that these men, adult men, ate dog food. They ate dog food.
Yeah.
But I know that they were also, like you said, gassed up on beer and meth. Now, without you providing that for them, they were also able to provide that for themselves, right?
Yeah.
So they had food, they had money for meth and beer, but not food?
The methamphetamine it wasn't a drug. It was more the coin of the realm. Meth was everything. It literally was culture. It's they kind of coped. You get into that euphoria, and you're able to kind of, okay, I'm starving, but things are kind of things are kind of interesting. So whenever somebody had a rock, they shared it with others, and the dog food was I want to say I might have brought 3 bags, because I would stop, maybe I'd come down maybe once every 2-3 weeks, and I always stopped at Tractor Supply, I believe, in Banning or Beaumont, and got dog food.
And how many days again would you stay there at a time while you were there?
Chief Michael Lexick and I became really good friends, and he would allow me to sleep in the Niland fire station when the openings were getting hot and heavy, because Chief was as interested in this as I was. I mean, this is where he grew up. And he was just there was no judgment in Chief Mike. He, hey, they got to make a living. And he also, he took care of these people. So he became kind of my quiet champion, and would take me out in his 4-wheel drive, and we'd go actually right to the edge of the targets. Chief Mike, because he had grown up in Niland, had hunted in the Chocolate Mountains before the Navy took nearly all of the land. And he was pissed, because this is where he hunted deer. And so they took that away from him. So the irony was, we go into the range, see a desert deer. Desert deer are usually about this tall. In the Chocolate Mountains, they're about this tall, because they go into the bomb craters like it's a salt lick. And they're absorbing all these heavy metals from the ordnance, from the fuses, magnesium, phosphorus. So they are giant mutant deer.
Tell us about the Chocolate Mountains environmental state.
The chocolates are some of the best vestiges of low desert biota. They're what was just phenomenal was you kind of go through big stretches of open space in between the 5 target areas. The target areas are also called kill zones. They're also called impact areas. And you have to drive through, navigate desert washes, savanna. And I never saw more desert tortoises. And I've lived in the Mojave off and on for probably 30, my God, I'm 62, so 40 years, and saw more desert tortoises in the chocolates than any place. I saw ironwood trees that had just all but disappeared, because ironwood is it's this beautiful tree that carvers destroy, for small art pieces. I saw, just beautiful stands of ironwood, raptors. That's the really striking irony, is that it's a militarized wilderness. You have war going on overhead, but for the most part, the land in big swathes is undisturbed.
It sounds terrifying. I give them all the credit. Did Border Patrol go out onto the bombing range?
This was another development as this was becoming kind of my bailiwick, a big part of my journalistic beat. There was a certain character, Downey Holcomb. Downey was one of the longtime scrappers, and Downey was a kind of like a NASCAR figure in that outlaw cosmos. He had ingested so much meth that these teeth would move independent of his jaw. His jaw would be going like this, and his teeth would be going like this. And he'll look like Popeye. And it was just fascinating. And Downey he evoked your bootlegger. I mean, he took this really seriously. And as the Marines were chasing Downey in a Humvee, they had a really, really horrific accident. So as a result, they never chased scrappers and range runners after this incident. 2 Marines had pretty serious injuries from their Humvee in the pursuit of Downey. So in the scrapper community, Downey kind of had a lot of respect. And he was just, it's getting to a place, a judgment-free place. I adored the guy. Unfortunately, I watched him die. He died in Palm Springs at the hospital, and I was living in Palm Springs then, so I would come and visit him and bring him cigarettes, and he this was a guy that he started every morning with white label vodka or a line of Crystal, and that was beginning of his day.
So that was breakfast.
Yep.
How did he get from Niland or the mountains all the way to Palm Springs?
He was hellevac'd. I believe he had a heart attack.
Well, what about the cluster heaven? What is that
Cluster
about?
Haven. Cluster Haven, insanely dangerous place. I believe it's the only impact area left in the United States or in the continent United States where we can still drop cluster bombs. And cluster bombs are one of the most ignominious, horrific creations. And ironically, it was Da Vinci that created the cluster bomb. The cluster bomb is something that you drop to deny your enemy. They're basically, it's a heavy half. They call them a heavy half, which is about the size of a water heater. And as it's dropping, there's fuses that make the 2 halves separate. When they separate, they launch 300, a little larger than a hockey puck, and it cuts you in half. It explodes.
Are they like mini missiles or?
They call it flechette, and flechette is a type of steel that's being to give you a devastating injury. And to watch these things explode is mind-blowing because it literally looks like, so you see this canister, and this canister is probably 8 foot, maybe 9 foot, and it explodes at maybe 100 or 200 feet above the landscape. And then all these mini explosions, they call them submunitions, are exploding out in all these different directions. The cluster bomb has a really bad slop rate. The slop rate means the ones that don't go off. So 1 out of every 3, maybe 1 out of every 5 don't go off. But the scrappers look at Cluster Haven as the Wells Fargo ATM because that is the moneymaker. It's all aluminum. So one of the most dangerous places on earth is big money to them. And I went into that range once. I wouldn't get out of the vehicle. I was looking at things. I didn't want to throw my shadow on it. And these guys are out there like, holy hell, dude. Oh.
Did you get to see any of them go off? Because you're describing it in
Oh,
detail.
yeah. I watched from probably a mile and a half. And again, it explodes in midair, and then you have all these really angry pieces of metal going in every different direction. It's what they call an anti-personnel weapon. So it basically shreds human bodies.
Ugh.
Yeah, by the hundreds. That's just one. So if you drop them in numbers, so you imagine 10 of these dropping over one particular area, and it's horrific. This particular target, though, is actually very, very narrow. It kind of runs up against some hillsides, and you could see these heavy halves are all the way in the flats of this target, all the way up the hill, and you're thinking, man, there's some really bad really dead targeting because they're all over the hills.
Yeah.
And it's not just our pilots. The Brits come in there. The British RAF come in there. Any NATO country that still uses cluster munitions. Cluster munitions are so ugly that I think only 6 countries are still not signing the ban.
So only 6 countries are using them.
I believe U.S., China, Russia, Israel, Great Britain. I'm at a loss for who the other might be. They're that nasty. And they're still killing children in Southeast Asia. Cluster bombs that we dropped in 67, 69, 71, 72. A Laotian boy or a Vietnamese boy or a little girl is in a field, maybe they're tilling, and they see something that's really flashy, and then they're dead, or they've lost a limb.
So how do these scrappers know how can they determine which ones are live and which ones aren't? And how do they even have that knowledge in the first place?
The better versed scrapper knows what you don't touch and what you can salvage. The fellows that are doing this, I met one particular guy in the Mexican restaurant in Niland, and I believe he was a plumber, and he had on his Carhartts, and he was kind of clean cut. And he said, what are you here for? And I said, well, I'm a journalist, and I'm covering the range. And he says, I just did a run. And I said, you did a run? He said, yeah, I got behind in my mortgage payments. And he was a plumber. And I think he was from Calipatria, just down the road. And he said he did $3,000 in one run, got out. So maybe he got lucky that he knew, or maybe he did his homework. Because you could actually look at a lot of online coverage of all these pieces of ordnance and figure out how you take them apart. It's not really that difficult.
And this was in Cluster Haven that he went to?
He wasn't specific, but I'm pretty sure that he mentioned heavy halves, so he would have had to gone into the cluster bomb range.
So I got a question. Do people scrap on other military bases?
Yes. The 29 Palms Marine Corps Weapons Station actually airs either our trailer, or one of our films when visiting press come in to portray the transgressive types who actually come on to their target areas. At least 3 of the scrappers that I had lengthy interactions with scrapped 29 Palms. One of them, they destroyed his truck. They actually blew it up just to kind of send a message, don't ever come back here. Some of my scrappers went as far as northern Nevada to the Fallon Ranges, where the Top Gun Navy where they train. They're adept. They get out. It was a particular Park Service, National Park Service ranger who reached out to me, who patrolled the area in between Death Valley National Park and Fort Irwin, which is the Army's training center. And they do some hyperkinetic training exercise. It's called force on force, where if you were, say, National Guard, or if you were a unit in another part of the country, they would bring you into Fort Irwin and you would fight the home team. It's force on force. And you learn different tactics. And this ranger reached out to me and said, yeah, man, I saw your coverage and you should come out here. It's just nuts. And he thought that it was basically street gangs that had people in the Army who were taking weapons into what was called the bowling alley, leaving them out there, and then their people would come and take them out. And it was plastic explosive, it was mortar rounds, some really high-speed stuff. This particular ranger was actually kicked to the curb because he became kind of troublesome to both the Army and to the National Park Service.
So do you imagine that the surrounding regions, like what is it, Slab City, the Salton Sea, Niland, where do you see them in 10, 15, 20, 50 years?
There's something of a renaissance in Niland, and it has to do with lithium, and also Niland, because it's so poor, the companies that are always trying to advance how we deal with waste, with refuse. They build, the turbines that burn at I don't know how many thousands of degrees, and they build these pilot projects. One of them, strangely enough, backs right up to where the Navy SEAL base is in the Chocolate Mountains, and it became, I think they scaled up, and it became kind of a working trash tube. I can't remember the term, but you have a great deal of lithium at the southern end of Salton Sea, enough that this may really take the region and lift it. But you also have, because of the militarism, because of the dust blowing onto the range and then taking all these heavy metals and particulate matter, the Chocolate Mountains are, I think, the 8th largest source of particulate pollution in the United States. So you have these prevailing winds that come in, and they take all these really nasty chemicals, and they drop them on these poor communities that are primarily brown. And it's become something of an issue in all the communities around the Chocolate Mountains that, hey, you know what? Our kids have astronomically high rates of asthma. What you might see is a cancer cluster, because just like China Lake, with the desiccation of Onum's Lake, the wind picking up all those heavy metals, and then you've got kids that are developing brain cancers. So the prognosis for Niland is there's a lot of hope. They may turn the corner, but boy, it's front-loaded with some really, really delicate environmental issues. And you obviously have the Salton Sea. And as it continues to draw down, again, you have more heavy metals that are being, drawn up into the airstream.
Has the government spread any lies about the Chocolate Mountains, such as, oh, it's good, the mercury's good for you? That.
No. The chocolates are kind of all but forgotten. The range was expanded, and literally, I don't think anybody noticed. The Navy took another big chunk, and this may have to do with the fact that the chocolates are very, very minerally rich. At the south end, I believe the United States Geological Survey estimates that there's $1 trillion worth of gold in the chocolates. How you retrieve gold from a place that's been carpet bombed, for 50 years, 60 years. So that the area that the Navy grabbed is adjacent to where I believe the Navy SEALs have found gold, which is the north end.
So what was stopping the scrappers from collecting metals to collecting gold, which is a precious metal?
Oh, no. To be able to mine gold, you and especially in a desert environment, it's, number one, it's extremely labor intensive. You need cyanide, you need water. No, the scrappers are just, they know where to go, they know how to get in and get out, and they know that the Border Patrol are only going to pursue them to a certain boundary, that the Marines are not going to pursue them. So they kind of have a good sense of how it works. The problem is the recycling operation was closed in Niland. So all that ordnance is now going further south to El Centro. And to my understanding, is going to Mexico, because it's becoming more and more difficult for, say, you or I to take a truckload of 50 caliber or 20 millimeter rounds to a salvage yard. And they're going to look at you and say, where did this come from? Oh, I don't know.
Yard sale.
So can we backtrack really fast back to lithium? Can you give us what lithium is in layman terms and why it means anything to us?
Oh, you know what? I'm a Luddite. I don't know much about lithium other than it's a rare mineral, and it's strategically absolutely critical to a lot of different devices, from your iPhone to electric car batteries. It's in hot demand. Unfortunately, it happens to occur in dry environs, like the Atacama Desert, for instance, in Chile. And so you have places where, there's a lithium boom, and unfortunately it's drawing down all these very, very minimal sources of water. It's just the next gold rush. It seems to be front loaded with tragedy. There's a lithium mine slated to open in northern Nevada. It was built on the site of either Shoshone or Paiute massacre site, but it got punched through.
And what do you mean when you say drawn down?
The Atacama is the driest place on Earth, and so you have great deposits of lithium. It's a salt. And I don't know if you've seen images of the Atacama, but they have pink flamingos, and they find these little pockets of water. And with the fact that the consumptive, exploitive multinationals and conglomerates are going into these places where there's not much water, and they're drawing it down to pull out the lithium. So you may have the same kind of set of circumstances in Salton Sea. Luckily, we have pretty good environmental safeguards in California, but who knows how the forces, if you will, that are out for the lithium, just how willing they are to really push it.
And as for the people, how do they live life? Are they living, the poverty levels there are extremely low. Is everybody there living off of welfare systems, or what does daily life look like for them, and how are they getting by?
Yeah, Chief Mike described the slabs in Niland as 60% unemployment, average income around $8,000. The majority of the people were living from month to month on welfare checks.
$8,000 a year?
A year.
So on a personal level, what is the most significant thing you've taken away from your journalism?
With regards to the Chocolate Mountains?
Yes.
Boy, that's a good one. Again, dropping into the film for the first time in 12, 13 years, I went away thinking, my God, these people opened up their lives to me. And it was a gift. I wanted to do right by them. I wanted to get their story right. It taught me something about judgment. You have to go into these, being a desert journalist, you have to think of, nope, there's no hierarchy. We're all just trying to survive. And to come away from the chocolates, from Niland, from Slab City, and that staggering poverty, it was just some beautiful, beautiful moments. So I feel as though, on the one end, it was hyper real. It was just mind blowing. At the other end, there was just some really wonderful moments of getting out of there alive. Of I was trying to be kind. I was trying to help them where I could, and they would reciprocate. They'd make themselves available to me. We're going out. We're going on a run. Great. So
when they said we're going on a run, did you happen to say any Hail Marys or anything?
Well, I do pray. I'm a lapsed Catholic. But no, I again, you just kind of get into a space where you can't get fearful. You have to observe your body language. You have to take in the landscape. You have to see, are there planes coming at us? Are there helicopters on the horizon? What are we going into? Get a sense of what's it going to look like. So there's actually no time to pray. Your situational awareness is just peaked, and you have to maintain poise. And I think that's what got me through.
Yeah, we gotta know, be still and know He is God.
Do you feel like you took some of that situational awareness with you and it stayed with you, or do you feel like you still feel that?
Absolutely. I feel a really warm feeling in going away from that, looking at the film and the time that we spent with Snake Man and watching that snake that was maybe 12 inches long and just hyper agitated, ejaculating on Professor Kim Stringfellow and I, to, it might have been 6 years later, maybe 7, that Beastie Boy is now probably 24 inches, maybe 28 inches, and he's gorgeous. And Gary Snake Man would bring him around and he'd be just perfectly coiled like this. And there was one moment where he's, my D, you have to wear Beastie Boy. And I thought, oh man. So this is the point where trust is everything, right? he wants to put his snake around my neck. Gary's been bit, I want to say, between 19 and 26 times.
By Beastie Boy alone?
No, by other snakes. I don't know whether Beastie Boy ever bit him, but he has that much venom in him. I mean, it's astounding. So I had Beastie Boy around my neck with his head right here above my jugular. And again, just breathe and trust in Snake, man.
So when you talk about being a journalist, you don't say you're just a journalist. You call yourself a desert journalist. Do you think that came to you after your experience in the Chocolate Mountains, or have you been calling yourself that?
No. As soon as I had my first driver's license and learner's permit, I was in Death Valley regularly. And I was fascinated by the Mansons, like most Death Valley people are.
You said the Mansons?
The Mansons, Charles Manson, the Manson Girls.
Okay, that was in Death Valley?
Charles Manson was a scrapper. He scrapped Fort Irwin and he scrapped China Lake because he expected a race war. So he was stockpiling ammunition. He was probably our most notorious scrapper, although Chief Mike tells me that there was a Russian that was kind of living amongst people in Niland because he was looking at what kind of ordnance the Navy was using.
Like a spy?
Yes.
Interesting.
Oh, yeah. You got to figure. It's a great way to get a sense of, okay, what's in our arsenal? Well, I'm going to trespass into this range and see how they work. How many fuses they're using, what type of alloys and metals that they're using. So just to double back to your question, as soon as I got Death Valley in my blood, I began to write about it. And I got lucky that when Larry and Althea Flynt bought some non-pornographic titles, I was able to start writing about desert crime. And that kind of was my bridge into the chocolates.
What did you take out of it for the most part?
Wow. The irony that you have these outlaw survivalists who really speak to kind of that very American sense of individualism. Don't fence me in, stay out of my way. And yeah, they're grungy. They're not the type that most people want to have anything to do with, that want to get close to them at all. But I'll tell you what, I had a lot of fun. So again, it speaks to, you have to reserve judgment. You have to get beyond these social hierarchies. And, the margins are where a lot of the color is. You look at Salton Sea, you look at Bombay Beach now, and man, I loved Bombay Beach when it was really, really down and out. And now it's been destroyed by the hipster shitheads from Hollywood and buying all. And I so loved it when it was authentic because it just, you felt it. You looked at this person, you thought, good Lord, man, how do you do it every day? You even have air conditioning?
Yeah, what a luxury, right?
Right. And a lot of people don't. I mean, my guys are eating the dog food. They don't have air conditioning.
Do you think that American individualism is unique to America, or that individualism in general, or would you be able to draw comparisons to other places?
Well, the best example I could give you, so Of Bombs and Men is the second of the two bombing range films. The first, Scrapper went on the festival circuit. So Scrapper won 12 awards. Bombs and Men was the response to the acrimony that unfolded between my two partners, Oscar and Pierre, German French. So Pierre and I thought, we're going to bring back the humor. And with regards to that sense of individualism, I thought that this really does have, it's got currency. And Russia Today bought it and ran it for 2 months. And apparently was their highest rated documentary ever. So on the one hand, it did speak to this. The West is such a loaded proposition. The Marlboro Man, for example. And I think that the scrapper rangefinder phenomena kind of, you can look at it this way, you can look at it this way. It speaks to that very innate individualism, that rugged individualism. But the Russians also ran it because it shows just how poor some people are in the Golden State. The eighth of the sixth largest economy in the world, and you've got some of the poorest people on earth.
In all the ways that you have grown from this experience, that you have been able to connect with these individuals, how else would you like to honor them and their stories and their names? You've done so much through a documentary already, but
Yeah, the default would be a book, and I have probably 200 plus pages of manuscript. But at the same time, I adore the fact that they've all kind of just gone quietly to their separate corners. JR died in a veterans home, I believe, in Rancho Mirage, someplace in the low desert. Randy and Ronnie Borum became homeless, lives in abandoned building in Phoenix. I could only imagine what hell that has to be, living rough in Phoenix where it hasn't dropped below 100 in 3 months. Randy Borum actually showed up at my home a couple of times because of that gold fever. He ended up going into the San Jacintos thinking he's going to find gold. And this is a guy who he probably eats about every 3 days. So I love the fact that they've carved out their path and they're not going to deviate from it, and it may just end tragically, but that's the way they want to go. They are all just remarkable personalities, yeasty and colorful and so full of life. And again, nothing that really matters in this kind of attention economy and in everything that defines what American life is has any bearing on any of these individuals. If one of them had enough money to buy a new set of Van sneakers, he was thrilled. He's showing me, my D, I got some new Vans, man. It cost me $50. It's like far out right now. That's great. Yeah.
that's awesome. I want to acknowledge how much of your career, your blood, sweat, and tears you've put into this. It shows in the way that you talk about it. I know that the men who have passed on and the men who are still here and everybody who's been involved in that project is just beaming with gratitude that you were able to do that for them. So
Thank you.
I want to acknowledge that first and foremost.
And I want to offer my own acknowledgement again to the fire chief, Michael Lexick, is the embodiment of an American hero. This is a bare knuckle badass. He's a fire chief that carries a loaded handgun in his back, the back of his belt, because he gets into some really hairy situations because of all the lawlessness in the slabs and in Niland. But again, we will never betray judgment on any of these people. It was just his job. And his job was to protect and deliver babies in the agricultural canals. Their mothers are meth heads and the babies might get sold to a trafficker. And again, Mike just did his job, and he loved the place, and he was just the most positive reflection of Niland. And again, he was as fascinated by it as I was, and he also was a great help to me in opening up some certain threads and beats, and also Professor Kim Stringfellow. Because if I didn't have Kim's images, I don't know whether any of this stuff would have been published, because she's out there as badass as anybody. We're in a war zone. We're in a target, and Kim's shooting images, and fantastic images. And so again, rock solid. And Joshua Tree Girl.
She's a Joshua Tree Girl?
Professor Kim Stringfellow.
That's incredible. And it just goes to show how important journalism is. Everybody assumes that an American hero is, somebody that's putting on camis every day or something to that effect. But the way that you speak of these American heroes and the way that you know their story and are able to share their story, and you're also an American hero for being able to share all of this with other people, whether you want to take that or not. It's all good work.
No, I've always thought that the notion of heroes should be expanded to include people like nurses.
Right.
Teachers.
The hard stuff.
Teachers.
Not every hero wears a cape.
All right. Well, thank you so much,
Oh,
Michael.
of course.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful.
So great. lives under the moonlight. Bodies sleep where shadows creep. My shaft whispers secrets tight. Bleached bones dream in silence deep. Desolate canyon whispers true. Coyotes prance in haunting grace. Desert rhythm calls anew. Paw prints mark the hidden place. Catchy tunes with a dark embrace, where the wild winds softly wail. Unpolished cries in a lonely space. The desert breathes its ghostly tale. Pale sun casts a solemn light. Unforgotten names once bold. Every whisper stirs the night. A story lost yet still retold. Rhythmic pulse of an arid dream, unrelenting in its call. From the depths the echoes scream. Past the canyon's rugged wall. Catchy tunes with a dark embrace, where the wild winds softly wail. Unpolished cries in a lonely space. The desert breathes its ghostly tale. Catchy tunes with a dark embrace, where the wild winds softly wail. Unpolished cries in a lonely space. The desert breathes its ghostly tale.
Thank you for joining us in Area 62.